Welcome back to Sip&Talk. Great to have you with us again.
Hey, everyone.
You know, sometimes the world just throws so many headlines and facts at you. It feels like trying to catch water with a sieve, right?
Totally. It's a lot to keep track of.
But that's exactly why we're here to kind of help make sense of it all. Today, we're really digging into some fascinating developments, especially around Taiwan.
Precisely. We're diving into some of the biggest topics concerning Taiwan right now. Things like influential internet personalities, national defense strategies. We want to explore the nuances, the motivations, and what it all means for the region.
Yeah, connect the dots for you so you walk away feeling hopefully truly informed.
That's the goal.
Okay, so today we're tackling some listener-focused issues on Taiwan, and trust us, it's a juicy one. First up, we're going to talk about this well-known Taiwanese internet celebrity, the Curator.
Ah, yes, Chen Chehan.
Right. His recent comments have really stirred the pot. So what did he actually say? What might have been his purpose, And how did society react? It's been a wild ride.
Definitely. Then we'll shift gears a bit and look at President Lai Ching-te's recent fourth lecture on national defense.
Okay.
We'll break down what he laid out, how the opposition parties responded. Democracy means different views, and importantly, what Beijing had to say about it all.
Right. Understanding those different perspectives is totally key to grasping the complexity there.
Absolutely.
And finally, we'll zoom out a little bit. We'll talk about something fundamental to any healthy democracy: oversight, especially when it comes to government budgets.
Mm-hmm. Checks and balances.
Exactly. We'll look at Taiwan's national defense budget specifically, and maybe even draw some parallels to the U.S. Build Back Better Act discussions. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. A good comparison point.
It's really about figuring out why all this, arguing and debating in a democracy is actually, well, a good thing.
It can seem messy, but it's vital. Our mission, as always, is just to present these facts objectively. We want to encourage you, the listener, to form your own independent conclusion. Curator in Taiwan's identity crossroads.
All right, let's unpack this first big story. It really gives you a kind of unique window into Taiwanese society right now. We're talking about Chen Chehan, who most people online know as the Curator.
Right, so he's a pretty big deal online over there.
Huge. Mm-hmm. For anyone not familiar, he's a very prominent Taiwanese internet celebrity, also a successful fitness entrepreneur. Yeah. You could kind of picture him as this really outspoken social media guy, massive following. What makes him so compelling and sometimes controversial is he's always got something high profile to say, often pretty bold, provocative stuff.
And what's particularly interesting about him and why he matters for, understanding Taiwan is that his political stances, they seem to shift quite a bit. And many people see these shifts as a sort of reflection, almost a microcosm, of the bigger social trends and identity debates happening in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. A microcosm, yeah. That's a good way to put it. He's not just one guy talking. His journey kind of mirrors the wider currents in society.
Exactly. Understanding his path helps us get a feel for the pulse of the island.
And his political journey, man, it has been quite the roller coaster. Some really dramatic pivots. Early on, he was a super vocal, very fervent supporter of the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP.
Mm-hmm. The current ruling party.
Right. And he wasn't shy about it. He explicitly said, right out there, I am for Taiwan independence. That's a strong stance, very direct. But then things started to change.
And it was a pretty significant change. He moved towards supporting the Kuomintangs, that's KMT candidate Han Kuo-yu. And what's interesting here, based on how people interpreted it, is that this support seemed genuine at the time, like a real shift in his views.
Not just political gamesmanship, maybe.
It seemed like more than that, yeah. But the shifts didn't stop there. Later, he backed the Taiwan People's Party's, the TPP's KONJ. And maybe most significantly, he started openly criticizing both the KMT and the DPP, really positioning himself as, anti-establishment.
Okay, so he's kind of bounced around the political spectrum.
Yeah.
Which brings us to his latest transformation. This one has really grabbed headlines and, frankly, angered a lot of people. It happened after a recent trip he took to Shanghai.
Right, the China trip.
Yeah. After that visit, he started publicly identifying as Chinese. And maybe even more controversially, he frequently started calling China the motherland, or yi in Mandarin.
That term OB in the Taiwanese context, it's incredibly loaded.
They're pouring gasoline on a fire, right? He also made some pretty bold claims, said he was the first Taiwanese person to openly visit mainland China and actually talk politics there, which, people who follow this stuff are kind of like, really, first one, raise some eyebrows.
Definitely. And during his live streams from China, he was really praising the mainland's infrastructure, talking up the high-speed rail, the maglev trains, how modern it all was.
Okay.
Beyond just the trains and buildings, he also declared this personal ambition to be a kind of peace ambassador for cross-strait exchanges.
Yeah.
Said he wanted to bridge divides, promote understanding. And he also directly challenged what he called the DPP's misleading descriptions of China. He shared his own surprise that, for instance, toilets on the mainland actually had doors, like he was busting myths.
Huh. It does sound like he was trying to shatter illusions in his own way. And he kept saying this trip was all self-funded, zero political agenda, just a personal mission to show Taiwanese audiences the real China, provide a counter-narrative.
His line was basically, I used to be the fiercest critic, but now I've come, and look, there's no problem here. Kind of positioning himself as the ultimate truth teller, implying his old criticisms were maybe wrong.
Okay, so if we try to peel back the layers here, what might be the underlying motivations for all this? Because it's quite a shift.
Well, a few things seem plausible. First, his current stance, critiquing the mainstream political narratives. It fits perfectly with his long-established public image. He's always been the commoner, the anti-authority guy, the fearless speaker.
Right, the brand.
Exactly. So by challenging the dominant pro-Taiwan, anti-China sentiment, he reinforces that image as an alternative voice, someone who isn't afraid to go against the grain. It could be seen as, smart branding, keeps him relevant, keeps people talking.
That makes sense. It's like everyone else is saying this, so I'll say that. Gives him that rebel edge, but maybe there's more to it than just image.
Possibly. You could also see it as a desire to maybe move beyond Taiwan's traditional blue-green political fight. The KMT versus DPP, unification versus independence debate. He often talks about focusing on people's livelihood first.
The practical stuff, daily life issues.
Right. A more populist approach, maybe, focusing on policy competence over these big ideological battles, trying to appeal to people who are maybe tired of the constant political fighting.
Cut through the noise. Focus on what matters to the average person. That could definitely appeal to some folks.
And then you absolutely have to consider the, let's call it the practical aspects, market and algorithm considerations. He actually said pretty explicitly that he wished most people on both sides of the strait to like him.
Okay, that's telling.
Very telling.
Yeah.
It strongly suggests a strategic move. Think about business expansion into the huge mainland Chinese market.
Yeah.
And also just optimizing his content reach on platforms like YouTube. Cross-strait topics can generate a lot of views, a lot of engagement.
So it might be less about pure ideology and more about, business and audience building. Appealing to both sides means a much bigger potential market for his brand, right?
It certainly points in that direction. Commercial gain and broader audience appeal could be significant factors, alongside any genuine shifts in belief.
Which brings us to the reaction in Taiwan. How did people actually respond to all of this? Because it sounds like it was intense.
Oh, incredibly intense. You have to understand, Taiwan's generally negative view of mainland China isn't just like an abstract feeling. It's deeply rooted in very real concerns. Things like severe speech suppression over there, the arrests of dissidents. People remember cases like Li Ming-che very clearly.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Media control, and of course the constant military threats from Beijing. These aren't just hypotheticals, they're lived realities and anxieties. So when the curator starts praising China and using certain politically charged words, it hits a very raw nerve.
Especially those keywords, right? You mentioned motherland, Ouyun. Why is that one so explosive?
It's just inextricably linked to Chinese Communist Party, the CCP's official language. Think about phrases like, the motherland will protect you, which was used towards Hong Kongers to assert control. So in Taiwan, using "yi" is almost universally interpreted as signaling allegiance to Beijing's political system, not just, a harmless nod to cultural roots. It's packed with political meaning.
Gotcha. It's not just semantics, it's signaling alignment. And then there's the whole I am Chinese versus I am Taiwanese thing. That's huge identity politics, isn't it?
Absolutely fundamental. Yeah. While some Taiwanese do identify as Chinese, maybe culturally or ethnically, the vast, vast majority, consistently over 60% in polls, identify specifically and only as Taiwanese. It's a distinct identity that's been growing stronger for decades.
So when he says, I am Chinese, it feels like a direct challenge to that core identity for many people. Like he's either denying it or trying to provoke.
That's exactly how it's perceived by many. Is it denial? Is it deliberate provocation? It raises those questions immediately. And on top of that, Taiwan is always on high alert for anything that looks like pro-China influence operations.
Because of the history, right.
Exactly. Decades of experience with CCP tactics like United Front work, trying to co-opt people using bought-off individuals, leveraging red money influence to shape public opinion. So actions like the curators quickly trigger accusations of leading the narrative for Beijing or engaging in cognitive warfare to undermine Taiwan's defenses. There's a deep, historically grounded distrust.
So, yeah, no surprise there was a massive backlash. A lot of his former fans, people who like his earlier anti-China, pro-Hong Kong stuff, felt betrayed.
A huge sense of betrayal was reported, and that quickly turned into talk of real-world consequences, like consumer boycotts against his fitness brand and other businesses. The message was kind of like, if you align with narratives we see as harmful, expect pushback.
Economic consequences. And what about the worry that China could use his words as propaganda, regardless of his actual intent?
That's a major concern. Statements like Taiwanese recognizing their ancestry or embracing the motherland are perfect fodder for Beijing's propaganda machine. They use it internationally to undermine Taiwan's sovereignty, to say, see, even prominent Taiwanese agree they're part of China. It directly works against Taiwan's efforts to be recognized as a separate democratic entity.
And the political fallout, did the parties jump in?
Oh yeah, the DPP criticized him pretty harshly, calling him a pro-China traitor. There were even calls for investigations under national security laws. The KMT had a more mixed reaction, some defending his right to speak or engage in dialogue. And one DPP figure controversially framed it as a KMT and CCP joint performance, implying it was all coordinated.
Wow. Okay, so it became a real political football. Now, one specific statement he made seems particularly controversial. Taiwan's direction is decided by 23 million people, but Taiwanese lives are decided by 1.4 billion Chinese compatriots. Let's unpack that logic or lack thereof.
Right. That statement drew immediate criticism in Taiwan. The core flaw, critics point out, is the premise itself. The 1.4 billion people in China, sometimes referred to with loaded terms like leaks or refugees in some Taiwanese online discussions, suggesting a lack of agency. They don't actually have the democratic rights to decide their own future.
Good point. No free elections, no real free speech.
Exactly. Think about whistleblowers like Dr. Li Wenliang during COVID, artists like AI Weiwei, protesters like Peng Zizhu. They get suppressed. So if they can't decide their own destiny, how can they decide Taiwan's? The real deciders in China aren't the people, it's the CCP regime.
That's a critical distinction. So the whole premise is shaky. And what about the numbers game idea? Like 1.4 billion versus 23 million, so the bigger number wins.
That logic just doesn't fly under international law or democratic principles.
Yeah.
It's the fallacy of majority rules over sovereignty. It suggests that just because one population is larger, it gets to dictate the fate of a completely separate, self-governing entity.
Yeah, that sounds absurd. Like saying Mexico should decide the future of the U.S. because they have a border or something.
Precisely. It's like suggesting, I don't know, Afghans should decide for Iranians or North Koreans for South Koreans. It's incompatible with modern concepts of sovereignty and self-determination. And importantly, that statement also misdirects responsibility.
How so?
By framing it as 1.4 billion people deciding, it kind of normalizes CCP threats, making them seem like an expression of the will of the people. It feeds right into Beijing's narrative that all Chinese people want to take back Taiwan. But as we said, the people aren't the ones initiating aggressive policies. The regime is.
And that framing is dangerous because it could be used in psychological warfare, right? Make aggression seem inevitable, like a natural outcome of demographics, not a political choice by a regime.
Exactly. Makes it seem like, oh, well, there are just too many of them. Resistance is futile. Which is a chilling narrative if you're in Taiwan. So you can see why people reacted so strongly. It's the combination of CCP-linked terms, the perceived dismissal of Taiwan's historical anxieties, the 823 artillery battle, the missile crises, Hong Kong situation, and this dangerous rationalization of military threats based on population size. It all just hits very close to home.
Wow. So summing up this whole curator saga, what's the big takeaway? It seems like his story is just a really sharp lens into how complex identity, business, and politics are in Taiwan right now.
Absolutely. It really illustrates how even seemingly simple statements or actions by one individual can tap into these incredibly deep-seated fears and aspirations. It reveals that ongoing tug-of-war over what it means to be Taiwanese, especially facing such huge external pressures. And maybe it hints that his shifts might be more about strategic branding and market access than pure ideology. But the impact is still profoundly real. It definitely highlights the need for critical thinking when we consume media from public figures.
No kidding. Far from simple. Okay, let's shift gears now, but stick with Taiwan. Let's talk national defense. President Lai Ching-te's fourth lecture on national defense. This sounds important.
Extremely important. It's not just another speech. It's a major policy statement, especially given Taiwan's unique and, frankly, precarious geopolitical spot right next to a military power that's expanding rapidly.
Lai Ching-te's national defense and geopolitical reactions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So President Lai laid out some pretty significant pillars for Taiwan's defense strategy in this lecture. And he didn't mince words about China's growing military power, did he?
He put the data right out there, and it is stark. Since the year 2000, China's defense spending has gone up every single year. It's now over NT $8 trillion.
8 trillion NT dollars. That sounds like a lot.
It is. It's over 7 times what it was just 20 years ago. And this isn't just a blip. It's a consistent long-term strategy in China, building capabilities that push their potential threat well beyond the so-called third island chain. It's a serious, expanding military force.
Okay, so faced with that reality, Taiwan's own defense budget becomes crucial. What did Lai propose?
He proposed a big NT $410 billion special defense budget. Within that, NT $150 billion is specifically tagged for boosting national defense resilience. But crucially, it's not just about weapons.
Right, you mentioned a dual approach.
Yeah. He also set aside an additional NT 20 to 100 billion to support essential civilian things, like the power company, Taipower, and public welfare programs. It shows a strategy of strengthening both defense and the underlying civilian society and infrastructure. You need both to be resilient.
That makes a lot of sense. You can't just have guns. You need the lights on, people fed, the economy running, while also preparing. And what was his core message about peace?
His main point was that true peace can only come through strength. He argued that a robust, credible defense is the only way to protect Taiwan's democratic way of life and achieve genuine, lasting peace. He even brought up historical examples, like the battles of Goning II and the 823 artillery battle, to evoke that spirit of collective resistance and national protection.
Trying to rally the nation by reminding them of past resilience.
Exactly. And he made a very direct appeal for bipartisan unity. He acknowledged political competition is normal in a democracy, but he stressed that national security absolutely cannot be compromised by internal fighting.
What was his quote? Something like, parties can compete.
The nation cannot be sacrificed. A direct plea to the opposition not to block essential defense budgets, basically saying, we can argue about other things, but not this.
And it gets specific about the budget measures too, right? Show they're serious.
Very specific. The immediate goal is boosting defense spending to over 3% of GDP, up from the current 2.5%. That's more in line with, say, NATO targets.
Okay.
They're also focusing on improving things for the troops, salary increases, combat unit allowances, even renovating 87 military barracks, better conditions, better morale.
Makes sense. And what about international help, U.S. arms sales?
Big focus there. Taiwan has completed 30 U.S. weapons sales totaling $9 billion USD over the last 5 years. That's a significant investment in upgrading their capabilities through partnership.
In training. It's not just about the hardware.
Absolutely. Big emphasis on training for asymmetric warfare, finding clever ways to counter a larger force, plus rapid response and dispersed operations. They're aiming for 154,000 trainees annually. That's a lot of people getting prepared.
And developing their own stuff, too, not just buying from others.
Yes, a critical piece is investing in indigenous capabilities, developing their own defense assets, like the Brave Eagle jet trainer and the Haikun submarine, often collaborating with international partners, like the 26 U.S. companies involved in some of these projects. It's about building self-reliance.
And you mentioned societal preparedness earlier. Getting the whole country ready.
Right. It's not just the military. They're developing 1,000 disaster collaboration centers across the island and getting around 15,400 people participating in town resilience drills each year. It's a whole-of-society approach to defense and resilience.
Okay, that sounds like a comprehensive plan. But this is a democracy. Did everyone just say, great plan, Mr. President?
Huh. Not quite. A united front is always tough in a vibrant democracy. The opposition had things to say. The KMT, for example, countered Lai by pointing out that the total defense budget, including regular and special funds, was already at a record high of NT $476 billion.
So they were saying, hold on, we're already spending a lot.
Pretty much. Some KMT members accused Lai of misrepresenting the situation, maybe trying to make it seem like defense wasn't already a priority. It immediately added that layer of partisan argument.
And didn't one KMT legislator accuse Lai of misunderstanding democracy?
Yes, Wang Changlang criticized Lai, suggesting he was trying to silence dissent on defense matters, implying it was leaning towards a dictatorial mindset. Another KMT figure, Ling Tao, pointed out the seeming contradiction. Lai calling for unity while the DPP was supporting efforts to recall opposition lawmakers.
Yeah, that does sound contradictory. Let's work together, but also let's try to kick you out of office. What about the TPP, the other opposition party?
The TPP also pushed back, especially on the idea they were blocking funds. They explained that freezing some money, like for the Haikun submarine, was purely technical, waiting for sea trials to be completed. They said other funds were already unblocked.
So, procedural issues, not outright opposition to defense itself.
That was their argument. They strongly denied Lai's accusation of deliberately not wanting defense. They framed their role as rational oversight, not intentional obstruction. And TPP's Wu Yuxi echoed the KMT's point, questioning Lai's standing to call for unity while using rhetoric about eliminating impurities, which they linked to the recall efforts.
Okay, so the opposition's core argument seems to be, we support strong defense, but we question the administration's methods, transparency, and maybe their calls for unity seem insincere given other political actions. The budget freezes are about oversight, not sabotage.
That's the essence of their position. It's the classic democratic tension between executive action and legislative scrutiny.
And inevitably, what did Beijing say about Lai's speech?
Predictably strong condemnation. China's Taiwan Affairs Office spokesperson, Chen Binhua, called Lai's speech full of lies and deception, especially regarding Taiwan's sovereignty claims, which Beijing rejects.
Standard rhetoric from them?
Pretty standard, yes. He used the phrase that such fallacies would be abandoned by history. It's their way of dismissing any narrative that challenges the one China principle. It just underscores their unwavering stance.
And this ties back a bit to the curator story too, right? Concerns about soft unification propaganda.
Exactly. Things like the curator's visit, or even small details like playing songs like I Love You, China during his mainland live streams, fuel worries in Taiwan about subtle efforts to sway public opinion towards unification. It adds another layer of complexity.
And there's also that disturbing issue of defections within the Taiwanese military, Tugong.
Yes, that's a serious internal concern. There have been documented cases of Taiwanese military personnel showing allegiance to the PRC, appearing in videos with PRC flags, even saying they'd internally rise up if China attacked.
Wow. That must cause huge public outcry.
It does, especially because the sentences for these actions are often seen as very light, maybe just a few years in prison. It raises real questions about loyalty within the ranks and whether the current laws are a strong enough deterrent.
So wrapping up this defense part, it's fascinating how it's not just about missiles and budgets.
Yeah.
It's deeply tangled up with internal democratic politics, historical anxieties, international relations, and even individual loyalty issues. A real web.
Absolutely. Taiwan's defense strategy is clearly a direct response to a growing threat, but the internal debates and the external reactions just highlight how complex national security is in a democracy. It's this constant balancing act, preparing for external threats while upholding democratic processes and accountability, all under the intense scrutiny of a powerful neighbor. The takeaway is that security isn't just weapons, it's also about political coherence, unity, and how your system functions internally and is perceived externally.
The democratic safety valve. Budget oversight in action.
That's a great point. It's not just the numbers, it's the trust, the political will, the accountability. Which leads us perfectly into our next topic, budgeting in a democracy and why oversight is just so critical. Because budgets, they're way more than just spreadsheets, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're really the concrete expression of a government's intentions. They show you what a nation actually prioritizes.
And who holds the power over the budget in a democracy?
Fundamentally, it rests with the legislative branch, the people's representatives. They're the ones responsible for reviewing, overseeing, and ultimately approving how public money gets spent. It's a crucial check on the executive branch.
So why are budgets so vital beyond just paying the bills? First off, policy implementation, right? Great ideas mean nothing without funding.
Exactly. Budgets are the engine oil for government programs. No budget, no action.
Then there's transparency. Budget review lets citizens see how their tax money is being used. It's their right to know.
Crucial for accountability. And it's a key part of checks and balances. Legislative oversight stops the executive from having too much power, prevents potential misuse of funds, keeps things in check.
And as you said, budgets reveal priorities. Defense, education, healthcare. Where the money goes tells you what the government really values. Taiwan's defense budget, for example, around NT $606.7 billion now, including the special funds, that's not just a number. It reflects their assessment of risk, their security priorities.
Precisely. Which brings us to oversight as democracy's safety valve. Democratic systems don't just hand over a blank check to the government. Spending requires thorough scrutiny by the people's representatives, like Taiwan's legislative yuan or the U.S. Congress.
No blank checks allowed. Yeah. And the benefits of good oversight are huge, right? Like fighting corruption.
Definitely. Oversight helps prevent misuse of funds, shady contracts, kickbacks, that sort of thing. It keeps people honest. Legislators can also demand more information, conduct cost-benefit analyses, make sure projects are actually sound and justified.
And it protects the taxpayers, making sure every dollar is spent responsibly. Plus, it can stop agencies from just inflating their budgets to get more money than they really need.
Right. It prevents that kind of bureaucratic bloat.
Yeah. There's a flip side, isn't there? Oversight can go too far or get tangled in politics.
That's the double-edged sword. Essential, yes. But excessive oversight, especially if it's driven by political payback or just partisan gridlock, can seriously slow things down. It can delay vital military procurements, stall infrastructure projects, basically gum up the works. We see this struggle often, both in Taiwan and the U.S.
Yeah, it's a constant tension. So let's look at Taiwan's defense budget again through this oversight lens. The budget's been increasing steadily because of the China threat, right?
Yes, steadily up. NT $606.8 billion in 2024, projected NT $647 billion for 2025, aiming for over 3% of GDP by 2026, a clear response to the perceived threat.
But within that increase, there's controversy and oversight, like concerns about transparency on big projects, the submarine program.
Exactly. Opposition parties have raised questions, asking for more details, more transparency on projects like the indigenous submarines. Like, we need to see the plans before we sign off on billions.
And that led to budget freezes sometimes.
Yes, specific items were frozen, like NT $8.4 billion for some submarine and drone projects. The opposition justified it by saying they needed more information or clearer progress reports. This is where that political clash really heats up again.
President Lai says they're deliberately not wanting defense, but the opposition says they're just doing their job, demanding procedural justice.
Right, and this conflict, messy as it looks, is actually the system of separation of powers and mutual checks working. It's supposed to be a bit adversarial. That constant questioning, that opposition, it's a safeguard against misuse of power and money.
Even if it looks like just political fighting sometimes.
It often is political fighting. But that fight, ideally, serves the purpose of accountability. However, there's a risk. If the infighting goes too far, if budget cuts or delays become excessive, it can undermine international confidence in Taiwan's defense resolve.
Yeah, allies might wonder if Taiwan can actually follow through, and the DPP has accused the KMT and TPP of weakening democracy through this kind of obstruction, leading to more friction.
It's a very fine line between responsible oversight and detrimental obstruction, especially when national security is on the line.
And this isn't unique to Taiwan. We saw a similar drama, maybe on a larger scale, with the U.S. Build Back Better Act.
Right, a perfect parallel. Remember President Biden's huge BBB plan. Initially $3.5 trillion, then cut down, aimed at massive social and climate changes.
Yeah, that was ambitious.
And the legislative battle over it really showed how intense and sometimes fragile these budget reviews can be in a democracy. It was a major fight within Congress.
So comparing the two situations, obviously the scale is different. Taiwan's defense budget versus trillions for BBB.
Vastly different scale. But the controversies have similarities. In Taiwan, it's often about military procurement details and budget freezes. In the U.S. with BBB, it was more about internal party divisions, like Senator Manchin's famous vote.
And the political dynamics, Taiwan, national security versus internal politics, U.S. left versus right ideologies, electoral interests, but both show budget fights as central political battlegrounds.
Absolutely. And both use similar mechanisms, Taiwan's legislative yuan, the U.S. congressional committees, flexing that oversight muscle. Interestingly, even within BBB, there was money linked to Taiwan's defense.
Really? In that big social spending bill?
Yep. about $12 billion for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, including $500 million specifically earmarked to boost Taiwan's defense capabilities. It highlights that U.S. support for Taiwan, getting American weapons, those 30 sales, $9 billion USD in joint training, investing in things like drones and electronic warfare.
So it shows how interconnected these things are, even across different budget bills.
Yeah.
But the U.S. has its own oversight challenges too, right? Making sure the money is used effectively.
For sure. Agencies like the GAO and the Pentagon monitor how funds are used. But delays happen. We saw it with the M109A6 howitzer sale to Taiwan getting canceled, often due to U.S. production issues. That kind of thing can make Taiwan nervous about U.S. commitment, regardless of the allocated budget.
And that points to the risk of maybe too much scrutiny or just bureaucratic hurdles delaying things.
It's a possibility. Some argue that overly strict oversight, or just production bottlenecks made worse by bureaucracy, could slow down critical military sales to allies like Taiwan, which paradoxically could weaken deterrence when it's needed most. Trying to be too careful could backfire if it means things don't arrive on time.
So after looking at all this, budget debates, oversight, political fights, what's the big takeaway? Why is all this democratic noise actually valuable?
It boils down to this. While the arguing in a democracy might look messy, slow, even chaotic, it means the system is actually working. We should always prefer debate and transparency, however noisy, over silence and opacity.
Unlike authoritarian systems.
Exactly. Contrast it with regimes like China, where budgets are just handed down by the leadership. Yeah. No real public scrutiny, no independent oversight. That often leads to massive corruption and zero transparency, especially with things like their military budget. You just don't know where the money is really going.
Right. It's like managing household finances. If nobody asks questions, weird spending happens. But if there's discussion, you usually end up with a better outcome.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
So despite the political infighting, the budget freezes, the occasional politicization, the democratic process, with its checks and balances, is fundamentally better than a system without oversight, without transparency, without the basic courage to question authority.
So democratic budgeting, it's like a debate, sometimes loud, sometimes slow, but it helps find truth and is ultimately worth it.
Precisely. Messy, maybe, but robust and accountable.
Outro. Wow. Okay, that was quite the journey through Taiwan's world today. From internet celebrities shaping opinions to the really critical debates about national defense and how democracy actually oversees spending. It's so clear how interconnected everything is.
Definitely. It's a fascinating snapshot of a vibrant democracy dealing with some really complex challenges, both inside and out.
We saw how individual actions can tap into these deep societal anxieties, right? And how budgeting isn't just numbers, but about a nation's core values, security, accountability.
Exactly. And remember, our aim here on Sip&Talk is always just to lay out the facts, give you the context so you can form your own informed opinions.
Yeah, just want to reiterate that. Our goal is always objective facts for discussion. We're not here to criticize any country, group, or people. Just want to give you the info so you can think independently.
And that commitment to independent thinking, that's really at the heart of what we try to do. In a world full of noise, we hope we can offer some clarity, some context to help you understand what's really going on.
So, after all that today, what does it mean for you? What stood out? Did anything surprise you? We genuinely love hearing from you. And hey, if you want more insights like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button for the Sip&Talk podcast.
Your engagement really does drive us. We're always looking for new, interesting topics to dig into.
Totally. What new, interesting things could become our material? Anything you're curious about, everyone hit us up. Send your ideas our way. We seriously can't wait to hear from you. Oh, and hey, for some extra fun, you should definitely check out our old friend Micky's YouTube channel, Micky to Life.
Ah, Micky.
Yeah. It's got some hilarious memes, cool music, wine tasting if you're into that, and some awesome travel vlogs. Seriously, it's just a good time over there. Check them out, Micky to Life.
Good stuff. Until next time, stay curious and keep sipping on that knowledge.